Welcome to the Jewish People's Podcast. I'm Yaakov Katz. We're recording this episode during Hanukkah, a holiday often just about candles and songs. But at its core, it is a story about Jewish resilience, moral clarity, and the refusal to accept intimidation and violence as being the price of being Jewish. That context matters for today's conversation. I'm joined by Yair Miller, the CEO of Keren Hayesod-UIA Australia and one of the most experienced communal leaders in Australian Jewry. Yair previously served as president of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies and as a vice president of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, giving him a front row seat to the challenges facing the community. I spoke to Yair in the immediate aftermath of the terrorist attack at Bondi Beach, an attack that killed 15 people and shattered a long-held assumption that Australia was somehow immune to the kind of hatred and violence that Jews have faced elsewhere across the globe. In this conversation, we talk candidly about what went wrong, how the Australian government dropped the ball, how antisemitism was ignored or downplayed, and how over the past 2 years, Canberra took an increasingly hard line against Israel while failing to confront the consequences at home, consequences that we saw play out on the first night of Hanukkah at Bondi Beach. And we ask what this moment means for Australian Jews who for decades believed they were safe, what it means to light Hanukkah candles this year, knowing that the sense of security has been deeply shaken. Hanukkah reminds us that light doesn't eliminate darkness all at once. It pushes it back, one candle at a time. And this episode is about whether Australia can do the same. Stay with us. Yair Miller, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's great to have you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. So, you're a prominent member of the Sydney Jewish community for a long time. You've played and filled different roles, communal roles and leadership roles. And I think what I would benefit from, and I think my listeners would benefit from, is we're now talking just about 36 hours or so, 48 hours after the attack. What is the feeling now within the Jewish community in Sydney in particular, but I would say probably in all of Australia? What is the feeling of Jews inside that country right now?
Yaakov, thank you, and thank you for your interest and everybody's interest in this story. It's a Jewish story, but it's a universal story, of course, and as you say, the whole of Australia is reeling from what was the worst terror attack that we've had in this country for at least 35 years, and the last one was, domestic terrorism in a place called Port Arthur, where over 30 people were murdered, but it wasn't racially or religiously motivated terrorism. It was a deranged individual who decided to go to an isolated island and kill a whole lot of people, not the iconic Bondi Beach, one of Australia's most famous landmarks, for people who were celebrating a festival of light and a festival of peace and harmony, and there were people there from all across Australia and across the world. And the community is reeling. There can be no doubt about it, as with all of the attacks that have happened across the globe in the last number of years against Jewish communities. It is deeply, deeply scarring. It is something from which the community will take years, decades to recover if it ever does. But ultimately, the support that's coming in from around the world has been remarkable, Jews and non-Jews alike, and it's been really one of the few very positive things that have lifted the community up. And as you say, the trauma is very new, it is very real, it is very raw. As we speak, they haven't even started the funerals yet, and those will probably be starting tomorrow, Wednesday, Australia time. But the community is in deep shock, deep mourning, and it'll take time to process what's really happened here.
I'm guessing also, I've been to Australia a couple of times. One of those times, you and I got to spend a lot of time together, going around to some of the different Jewish communities and institutions, particularly in Sydney. I had the opportunity to spend a wonderful Shabbat with you and your family there. But there's no question that Australia always felt like a place that was very safe, very secure. The Jews were fully integrated. The Jewish community was very successful. had political influence. People were succeeding in business. It was full integration. There was always security to some extent, but there wasn't a feeling. Correct me if I'm wrong, Yair, that something like this could happen. But now it has happened. I mean, you know, anti-Semitism has been exploding, definitely ever since October 7th, and we see that all around the world and in Jewish communities everywhere that are experiencing this huge influx in anti-Semitism as a result of Israel's war against Hamas. The globalized, the Intifada has happened literally now also at the iconic Bondi Beach, as you called it, in Sydney. I mean, I have to assume that this is a great, you mentioned the community reeling, but it's a great shock because Jews thought they were part of Australia. They were accepted by Australia.
Look, it's an interesting thing to think about, and a lot of the community leadership have been discussing it over the last few days, and the way it's been described, and it might sound odd, people are horrified, but none of the leadership is completely shocked that it got to this point, because from the 7th of October, the dynamic in Australia, as you say, have changed, and particularly those infamous scenes at the Sydney Opera House, not even 48 hours after the massacre of October 7, where crowds were allowed to gather, chant. There was a huge controversy of whether they were saying gas the Jews or where are the Jews or get the Jews, and there was an investigation as to what they were saying and did it breach criminal standards here in Australia or not. But ultimately, the environment that was allowed to fester on that night and moving forward basically gave a green light in some sectors to rabid anti-Semitism. And as we know from our history, when that when that anti-Semitism is allowed to fester and is left unchecked, and there isn't strong, courageous leadership against it from all levels, from law enforcement through to all levels of government, civil society, the ultimate end of that, unfortunately, as we've seen over many, many decades, over hundreds, thousands of years of our history, does lead to the killing of Jews. And that's what we've seen, unfortunately, in Sydney in the last 48 hours. That lack of really strong, clear leadership about what is right and what is wrong, what is immoral and what is moral, has allowed, in certain segments in Australia, to fester a feeling that attacking Jews is acceptable. And it starts with words, and it starts with written word, and it starts with spoken word and speeches in mosques and speeches at rallies, and it allows itself to evolve. And all you need is somebody, or in this case a father and son, who are slightly unhinged in some way, and we don't know all the details yet, but to do what they did, there has to be something with these people. And ultimately it's led to the tragic death of 15 people, not all of whom were Jews, by the way. We're aware of at least one confirmed, if not two, that were not Jewish, that happened to be in the area. And ultimately the Australian community at large and Australian society is going to pay the price for that.
From media that I've read, it seemed that there were a handful of policemen who were on site at Bondi Beach at this Hanukkah event. I know that the community has long had a security apparatus of itself, not armed guards, but people who, some of them wearing, like vests and earpieces, but kind of known to be providing security. So I'm guessing there was some level of security. There clearly not enough, and from just what we know now already, the father and son were able to really switch magazines. This went on for several long minutes of where they were able to shoot into the crowd of people who had come for the Hanukkah event. When you look at the situation now, I mean, what would you have wanted maybe to see from security forces, from local government, or from the federal government to have potentially done more to protect this event and the Jewish community? And by the way, I mean, let's also just point out, this isn't the first violent anti-Semitic incident over the last couple of years. There was the attack against the kosher restaurants. There was fire bombings of other Jewish institutions and buildings in Australia. So this wasn't just words for some time now.
Yeah. Look, you're right, and it's a good point to make. I don't want to get into the tactical details of that particular event because A, I'm not across it completely, and B, there is a long, complicated investigation that's going to have to take place. And generally in Australia, these things are pretty transparent. There'll be, police inquiries, there'll probably be a coronial inquest, etc. And all those things will start to come out when we move forward. Australia as a country is different to places, for instance, than places such as Europe, where when you're in Europe and you go to these, you're used to seeing police with long arms, even armored vehicles outside synagogues and at various Jewish events. That's never been the Australian way. As you say, Australia has been a country that has felt different, it has been different, and so this event in that sense wasn't completely different. There has certainly been a very marked increase in police response and police presence at a number of Jewish events since October 7. The police in New South Wales, I can speak for, have generally been excellent at working with our community, working very closely with our community. A lot of this comes from intelligence, a lot of it comes from posturing at leadership levels already. You can't judge in many ways the average policeman on the street and the people that are involved in these events, because it's much bigger than that and much broader than that. And again, there was clearly an intelligence failure here on this particular incident. What's public, and I can only talk about what's public, is that one of the two perpetrators was on the radar of ASIO, our domestic intelligence agency, but it was from a number of years ago. One of the lines of investigation, again, on the public record, they have to work out is how did they have him many years ago and then kind of lost track of him and didn't have him on their radar anymore. There were 6 legal firearms owned by the father. He had a license to own those guns, right? Long arms, which are used for hunting.
He was part of some hunting
club, correct, which is a part of Australian culture and tradition. And people hunt and people use long arms and they go to the firing range. Again, it's not a gun culture like the United States, but there certainly are pockets of Australian society that are into firearms, and he possessed those firearms legally, right? So there are a number of questions that need to be answered here. But again, it goes back to the environment more broadly, where the question is, was the posturing of government, law enforcement, was it right? Did they fully understand the threat? Did they fully understand what was happening around and the environment that was being created? And as you say, there have been a number of incidents, serious incidents that have taken place over the last 2 years. Thank God nobody had been killed up until this point. It had been close in the synagogue in Melbourne, but I think that there was a complacency here which was bred from the way people read things in society and not understanding how much of a boiling point things were reaching with our enemies. And ultimately, 15 innocent civilians have paid the price for that. And again, I'm not going to talk about the tactics of the police on the day, and I'm not going to comment on their response. There are 2 police officers that were critically injured at the incident. They were responding in the end. There was amazing bravery and a huge response from the police, from our ambulance services, etc. And Australia has always been a country, as you said, that's had security, a very good security network within the Jewish community of volunteers and people that secure our events. But ultimately, when you've got people that come with rifles and long arms, it's very hard to defend against that as a community, and especially, again, in Australia, where these things are not part of the norm, they're not part of what's expected, and it just took everybody by surprise, which is a problem. There's no question. It shouldn't have taken them by surprise, and it's something the Jewish community have been warning about now for at
and the
least 2
Jewish
years.
community, I'm assuming, not just the police and not just the government, but also the Jewish community is going to have to change the way it manages security and events, but that's another conversation for another time. This does lead me, because you mentioned that this was an intelligence failure, and I don't want to push you into a political corridor, but Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that back in August he sent a letter to Prime Minister Albanese and said, you're not doing enough, right? This is going to escalate. Netanyahu wanted to make a connection between the Labour government of Australia's recognition of a Palestinian state and say that that's what's connected. We could argue whether whether that terrible decision, how bad it was, whether that's what led to this or didn't lead to that. That's a separate thing. But we do know that there has been intelligence of definitely an Iranian plot for something inside Australia. That's what led the government, the same Albanese government that recognized the Palestinian state, to expel the Iranian ambassador from Australia. The government is on track also to recognize the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as a terrorist organization. That's something that's been going through the wheels for several months now. So it's not as if they were oblivious completely to the threat from Iran. We don't know what this father and son did they have ties to Iran? Did they not? Were they ISIS inspired? Whatever their motivation for it will soon be told. But I do want to ask you, do you feel that this government in particular dropped the ball here? That maybe this government and the way that it's handled itself and its criticism of Israel, which has been pretty extreme since October 7th, might have been something that helped fuel whatever flame it was that led to this attack?
Look, the proof's in the result. The government clearly failed, or there wouldn't be 15 dead people on Bondi Beach, right? I mean, it's
Right.
a self-evident statement in that sense. Look, there has been a government special envoy report. The special envoy on anti-Semitism, Gillian Siegel, put out her report in July. That's been sitting on the government's desk now since then, and they have failed to really implement the majority of her recommendations. Again, some of them are more controversial than others. There were some that needed more debate. But the point is that there's been no real follow through with that, no debate allowed in terms of trying to get it into Parliament. If there had to be legislative changes, put things into society for discussion, there hasn't really been movement. I think ultimately the environment that was created was partly created because of the relationship with Israel and because of the way they react to Israel. There can be no doubt about that. The government rhetoric against the state of Israel, not only within the recognition of the Palestinian state, but also the way that some of the language has been used to describe Israel and to describe Israel in terms that have not only enabled the anti-Semites within the anti-Israel movement, and there are a number of those on the extreme. Again, I'm not saying that everyone who's anti-Israel is anti-Semitic, but those more extreme elements that are in there, and that unfortunately has grown, that number of people in that extreme fringe has grown. This government has done very little to tackle it. And effectively they picked a side, right? And if you're going to pick a side in a conflict as complicated as that, and you're going to allow it to impact your domestic politics here in Australia, which it did, there was no question that it was driven by domestic political considerations on a number of fronts, that sort of thing is going to have results. And it can't not, right? You have people that are very much wedded to particular ideologies and ideas. And if those ideas and ideologies are given cadence and given respect in some ways by national political leaders in the way that they talk about the Israel conflict, in the way they talk about Israeli leaders, in the way they talk about the Jewish state, ultimately that's going to translate into actions on the ground. That's just the inevitable reality that occurs.
Yeah, you're the father of two young children, and I know that in Australia right now it's summer, and I guess schools are off, so kids are at camp or day camp, sleepaway camp. I just this past Shabbat in Jerusalem ate by friends. Uh, one of my friends, a couple, the wife is originally from Australia, so there was a group of high schoolers who actually came, who were there. They're on their summer trip to Israel. Um, I'm wondering what it's like as a father who now has two kids who are going on the streets. You're going to synagogue on Shabbat. You're going to Jewish community centers. They're going to Jewish camps. I mean, A, how do you communicate what happened to children? And B, um, how concerning it must be knowing that this has happened and your kids are out there going to these different Jewish places.
Look, it's exceptionally concerning. We had to be honest with them. We were at a Hanukkah event on the other side of Sydney when this took place, and we were in lockdown for an hour. And everybody's got mobile phones today, and all the parents, as soon as something happened, everybody pulled out their phones and were looking. And the kids are in tune. The kids understand this, and again, they've been living with this heightened sense of reality and this heightened alert to anti-Semitism and anti-Israel for the last two and a bit years. It's not new to them. They understand that there've been protests on Sydney Harbour Bridge and that there've been things happening around Sydney. They feel it, they see it. If I've got the newspaper lying in the house over Shabbat and the newspaper's on the table, my 10-year-old daughter, my 9-year-old, almost 10-year-old daughter will often sit and she'll just, take the newspaper whether we like it or not. And they pick these things up. So the reality is that the kids are feeling it. I think it's going to take time. The bigger issue at the moment for the community was that there were dozens of Jewish kids who were caught up with this thing right there. There was a bar mitzvah happening at a venue right on Bondi Beach. So there, are a few dozen 12-year-old kids who were stuck in this venue for 3.5 hours when the shooting took place because they locked everything down, that heard the gunfire, that were in the middle of the chaos that was going on. So the degrees of trauma are absolutely enormous. And so the immediate response of the community is to deal with those kids who were there and were in the middle of it. But yes, all of us, my wife and I, have had to talk about how do we talk to our kids about it? What do we tell them? My sister's got a daughter of a similar age to my kids. They're very close. We have to try and make sure the messaging is consistent, because if the messaging is not consistent and the kids are very close and they're talking, how do we navigate that to make sure that we don't cut across each other? Conversations we shouldn't be having. We shouldn't be having anywhere, let alone in Australia, which is a country that a big percentage of the Jewish community came to by choice, moved from all around the world to come to Australia because of what this country had to offer. And not in our wildest dreams would we have expected to be having to have these conversations in Australia. If you live in Israel, you understand and accept that that's part of the life that you choose as an Oleh. Terrorism is an unfortunate price that you're going to pay for being there, but you do it for a greater cause. If you stay in South Africa, you know you're going to have those problems. If you live in certain places in America, you know there's gun crime. You accept those risks. Australia wasn't one of those places. And as you said, this has changed Australia completely. And as we started at the beginning, Australia is going to be a very different place moving forward for all Australians, not just Jewish Australians. And going to the beach is an Australian pastime. It is kind of the quintessential Australian thing that you do. And all of a sudden, all Australians are going to be asking a question every time they go to the beach and every time they look over their shoulder. And that's terrorism. Terrorism affects broader society, and its aim is to disrupt society. Its aim is to create chaos. And
undermine personal security.
Correct.
Yeah.
And these two have really, in a sense, and excuse the metaphor, but they've hit a bullseye in a sense in terms of what they tried to achieve here. Absolutely iconic venue, affecting all Australians, but specifically targeting Jews in the middle of a religious, celebration. It's a perfect terrorist opportunity, and they took it with, unfortunately, deadly success.
Explain to us, if you can. I mean, Bondi Beach, I've been there. Not sure everyone who's listening to this has or knows. It's an iconic venue, 100%. It's one of the famous beaches of Sydney, but it's also a very Jewish venue, right? It's Jews. It's near the Jewish community. Lots of Jewish events are held there quite often, right? What can you tell us about the Jewish connection to Bondi Beach?
Look, the Jewish community, as you said, is established around Bondi in a sense. All the suburbs that have got the largest concentration of Jewish people in Australia, and definitely in Sydney, sit within 5 kilometres of the beach. And the beach is a gathering point. The beach is somewhere that people go, and again, it's, as I said before, an iconic part of Australian culture, and the Jewish community is part of Australian community. So if you go down the beach on an average Saturday or Sunday, there'll be thousands of members of the Jewish community that'll be going around the beach. Many identifiably Jewish. There is a community of religious people that live near the beach, and they will go for a walk on the beach at 6 in the morning the same way as anybody else, and they will go down there on a Sunday afternoon for a walk, like everybody else, or they'll go and get takeaway food or bring their sandwiches, and they'll go sit on the grass next to the beach, and they'll be there. That was just part of what it was, and it was a melting pot of international people, local people, and ironically, a lot of people used to come in from around Australia to be at Bondi, and from around Sydney, and of those, it was always known there was a big percentage of Arab, Lebanese, Muslim people that used to turn up as well at Bondi. It was known for it. There was a group that used to come in all the time, and again, there was never really a tension. There was never really a problem. It was, the traditional banter that you have every now and again, and like any open big beach and space, there was a bit of criminal activity and some fights every now and again. But just like anywhere else in the world, it was never a point of religious, racial, or intolerance, and it was really a spot where it was open to everybody. And as I say, in Australian culture, the beach is the great melting pot. That's where people go, and everybody is the same, and everybody mixes. And it is really such an integral part of society here, and that's why it is such an iconic spot for these terrorists to have hit.
In your day job, when you're not talking to me, you are the CEO of Keren Hayesod-UIA in Australia, one of the largest fundraising entities, charities that raises, you'll tell us maybe in a moment, millions and millions, if not more, of dollars every year for causes in Israel, right? The Australian Jewish community, for those who have been there, definitely know it. For those who have not been there, is truly, and I've seen it on both visits that I've had there, really one of the most amazingly Zionist, pro-Israel communities in the world. Like wall-to-wall Zionists, wall-to-wall support of Israel. Um, if in other countries, you go to Europe, you go to the United States, there's so many different voices, there's anti-Zionist movements. I mean, of course, you have some of that everywhere, but really one of the most emotionally connected, spiritually connected, but also very physically connected. Lots of Olim who come from Australia, lots of money that is raised by Keren Hayesod in Australia. I think maybe the largest fundraising country for Keren Hayesod around the world. When you think of, and you yourself have led several missions, I know, to Israel since October 7th, going around to the kibbutzim, taking Australians, showing them what's happened to Israel over these last 2 years. This is now, as you said, hit home. And I'm curious if you are at all worried that because there is a connection, whether we like it or not, there is a connection between what's happened in Israel and what's happened in Australia. There's a connection with the explosion. And in Israel, we now know that, right? We've known that for a while. I think it's something that the Israeli government needs to give more attention to and focus and consideration of how action that we take, whether it's Gaza or Lebanon or somewhere else, or the West Bank for that matter, that directly impacts Jews around the world, wherever they might be, from tent encampments at Columbia University to shooting attacks and massacres in places like Bondi Beach. But I'm curious, with your role and your hat as the CEO of Keren Hayesod, are you at all thinking about how this might undermine the connection? And you might have Jews who now say, listen, this is not good for me to be connected to Israel. What benefit do I have from this? It just brings us terrorism. It brings us murder. It gets 15 people killed. Why do I need that? Let me stay in my little Jewish community. I don't need to be connected to Israel.
Look, it's an interesting question. And as you say, ultimately, this is one of the most Zionistic communities in the world. It is a community that was established out of the ashes of the Shoah. A huge percentage of the community are survivors, their descendants now, second and third generations. We still have a few survivors as well, Baruch Hashem. But ultimately, I don't think this is going to determine the relationship between Israel and the community on that level. I think that if anything, it will strengthen it. And what's been remarkable to see over the last 48 hours has been the incredible outpouring in reverse now from Israel. As you said, this community has done for Israel in the last 2 and a bit years unprecedented, not only money, but unprecedented love and affection and connection. The money's been incredible. And yes, Keren Hayesod, global community, over 60 campaigns around the world. And the campaign here in Australia is the largest campaign globally. Again, just to clarify for your viewers, for those who don't know, Keren Hayesod operates everywhere but the United States. So it takes out the Jewish Federations, which is our partner organization, to feed in money to the Jewish Agency and other causes. But this is basically every community outside of the US. It is the largest campaign globally, and we've done unprecedented amounts of money over the last 2 years. And in fact, before that, starting from Ukraine, already, and the Ukraine war and the Olim, which is our bread and butter. But I think that if anything, it's going to strengthen it. And now, as I said, one of the most reassuring things that we've seen is the incredible reverse feeling and outpouring of love that's come back from Israel to our community. I woke up this morning to one of the chat groups that we have with our Keren Hayesod marketing team in Israel, and I haven't gone through it all yet. I didn't have time, but there's probably a dozen messages, videos, pictures from different communities around Israel, from different programs that we support, with kids sending love, photos, videos from leadership in those moshavim and yeshuvim that you speak about in Otef Aza and in the north of the country. We, as an Australian Jewish community, have had an impact and a footprint across the country, unlike any other organization. And now we're feeling that in reverse. And not only that, we're feeling it from that Jewish community globally as well. That leadership that you get from other Jewish communities around the world. And it's been one of the most reassuring things for the entire community here over the last 48 hours is to understand that we're not alone, to understand that we're not going through this on our own. And I think that, local causes, security, trauma is going to be in need over the next period, and that's natural and it's good. And as you said before, I've sat on both seats. I've been president of the Jewish community here in Australia, in Sydney, and vice president of the Australian Jewish community. I've sat now for over a decade with the Keren Hayesod hat on, and I don't think they're in tension with each other. I think they work brilliantly together when the community cooperates, which Australia does. And you need to prioritize, but I don't think we're going to see a dramatic decrease in people touring Israel, people coming to visit, people donating. I think ultimately it'll strengthen, because I think people have also realized that Israel is our safety blanket. Israel is our safety latch, as you said. The numbers from Aliyah were going up already. The number of files opened at the Jewish Agency has increased in the last 2 years from Australia. I don't think this incident is going to decrease it, let's put it that way. And I think ultimately people understand that relationship, that interplay between Israel and the diaspora, and Israel and Australia in particular in this case, is so critical. And it's been absolutely emphasized to all of us over the last 2 years. And if anything, it's only going to get stronger. And I think now will be the time, as you say, and Israel is starting already to send out teams. We've got teams coming from various organizations to provide trauma support. The government's reached out on various levels to the Jewish community, Israeli government, to the Jewish community, offering all sorts of support. And that's the relationship, that's the family. You know, when the mishpacha's in trouble, you jump in and you help. And I don't think when you get into crisis, it necessarily puts tension in the family. As long as it's managed properly and everybody's given their space to do what they need to do, crisis can make a family stronger. And I think my prediction is that if this is handled properly, which it will, it's actually going to make the family stronger. And it's not just the Israel diaspora, Israel Australia. It's that diaspora community more large, which will jump and support each other and make sure that every member of the family is looked after when there's a moment of need.
Yeah, there's something interesting in Israel that I remember even just after October 7th, when there were the images of the tent encampments and other anti-Semitic incidents around the world. Israelis were going crazy about, what about the Jews? What's happening in New York? What's happening at Harvard? What's happening in all these other places? And people would say to them, but you guys are the ones at war. And I think that connection is so real, and you definitely see it. And I hear it from every Israeli, and everyone is just horrified by what happened. It's a blow to the Australian people, to obviously the victims, and you have as you mentioned, a tough now 24 or 48 hours ahead with the funerals that will begin for the community, and the grief, and what's ahead, and of course learning the lessons, and keeping yourself safe is number one. But it definitely shows that this sense of peoplehood really coming to life is something that I think can give us some comfort, some warmth, that we know that we all stand together. Australia with Israel when Israel's in its hour of need, and now Israel with Australia, with the Jewish community there when it's in its time of need. So Yair, stay safe. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It's really it's heartbreaking. It's just truly, for anyone who knows the Australia and the Jewish community. I mean, it's anywhere this happens is heartbreaking, but especially there, so shocking and so heartbreaking. Hugs to you and your family, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with me.
Thank you, Yaakov, and thank you for the interest of yours and all of your viewers. And we deeply appreciate all the support and all the love. And please God, we should only know good news, Besorot Tovot, and see good things in the future.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode. As always, you can find us where podcasts can be found, on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, the website of Times of Israel. We'll be back in a few days with another episode. In the meantime, share this with your friends, family, and other people who you think might be interested. I'm sure that I speak for all of you. Our hearts, our minds remain with the Jews of Australia, with the Jewish community around the world. People everywhere are not feeling safe this Hanukkah, and that's something that has to change. But in the meantime, let me continue to wish all of you a happy Hanukkah, a Hanukkah Sameach. Let's bring some light to the world, friends. That's what we all can do wherever we might be. Take care.